Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. So before we get started with part 4 of our story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with our story, and what an exciting story it is. This poor woman has been through hell because of a Haitian curse. And let's see where the story now leads, because Bigfoot's going to be involved somewhere along the line, and I'm curious as to how that's going to happen. So let's continue with our story. I was in a daze as I took the opulent gold glass lift down to the ground floor. I found myself hastily stumbling over to my car, as if I was a drunk. I don't even remember that car drive home, as everything was like an ambiguous whirl for me. It was when I finally arrived home. I sobbed and sobbed for a long time. But the tears I cried were not only as a consequence of feeling rejected by Dr. Bernstone. The tears went way deeper than that, to the core of every single scarred, disfigured cell in my entire body that had been badly mangled and decapitated by my grief. I guess I was crying for everything that I had lost: the death of my parents and siblings, the tragic fortuitous demise of my grandparents, aunts and uncles. The best way I can describe it is I was caught up in an emotional turmoil, rather like a multiple pile-up of wrecked cars that you see on the highway. And I ask you, how do you ever begin to clean a chaotic upheaval up like that? So for me, all this crying was like purging out some of my deep hidden inner trauma. I had felt rejected by Dr. Bernstone for sure, but it seemed to have brought everything in my life to a head, rather like the pus in a boil, that needs to be squeezed out before any healing can progress. It was true. I had met Dr. Bernstone during the most fragile and delicate time in my life. No one could have been more broken and cut up, or as distraught as I was. When I began my sessions with Dr. Bernstone, he had become to me like the light at the end of a very dark, inauspicious tunnel. He had guided me through the perilous storm to a better, more peaceful place, where things were settled and calm. I had grown attached and enchanted by that light, fallen very hard for it, but all that light wanted to do was to bring me to a place of healing, regeneration, and restoration. It would seem I had wanted so much more from that light than it was prepared to give back to me. Pringles, sensing my obvious distress, crawled into my arms. She began to lovingly lick my face. I gratefully buried my head into her soft fur, hearing the reassuring drum roll of her purring response. "What would I do without you, Pringles?" I said to her through my puffy red eyes, as I looked at my cat so fondly. I knew that having Pringles around had brought me so much comfort during the darkest, most depressing times of my life. Pringle looked right up into my face. I could swear she knew exactly what I was saying. She let out a contented meow and stretched out her paws over me. Never had I been so glad to have a furry companion as I was now. I realized that everything Dr. Bernstone had told me when I confessed my feelings towards him was absolutely true. I was in love with the idea of being in love. When I walked away from my therapy sessions with Dr. Bernstone, he always made me feel lighter, and there was a skip in my step. In truth, he'd given me a reason to feel better about my life and myself. No wonder I felt so attached to him. It was good spending time in his company, talking about all my issues with him. I had shared things with him that I had never shared with another living soul. No wonder he was so special to me. No wonder I had developed an obvious attachment to him. I thought about my late mother when she discovered poor Pringles lying half dead on her front doorstep, after having been badly mauled by a dog. To all intents and purposes, when my late mother found Pringles hanging on to life by a faint, fragile shoestring, she had rushed the cat to the vet, and Pringles' life had been spared after astronomical vet bills were paid, even though it had been touch and go for quite a while, whether Pringles would actually make it or not. When Pringles finally returned home to recuperate, The cat became obsessed with my mother, for Pringles knew my mother had saved her life. Similarly, after Dr. Bernstone had slowly but surely given me my own life back with our therapy sessions, much like a very grateful Pringles who had become devoted to my mother, I had in turn become devoted to Dr. Bernstone, fixated and somewhat obsessed by him. I genuinely enjoyed talking to the man. He would listen to me and never judge. He would encourage me to think for myself. When you're in a lonely, insecure place in your life, it really is hard not to become attached to someone like I had become attached to Dr. Bernstone. I do think Dr. Bernstone liked me. He found me attractive in the way that you might feel about a good friend of yours. You might, for example, think the chocolate cake in the window of the bakery looks delicious and tempting enough, but it doesn't actually mean you want to eat it, or even buy it to enjoy after dinner. You might prefer something else that is more to your taste, like a cheesecake or a custard cream. There was no doubt in my mind that Dr. Bernstone was a very accomplished psychologist. He was very skilled at his job, incredibly professional, and very principled. He had admitted to me that I was not the first patient to fall for him, and I suspected I would certainly not be the last. Over the last year or so, Dr. Bernstone had become a good friend of mine, not just a therapist. The idea of not being able to continue my therapy sessions with him was very distressing. I had come a long way in my therapy, and the idea of talking to somebody else about my problems did not sit well with me. That night I cried deep into my pillow, until it was saturated by my tears. Finally I fell into a deep sleep, with Pringles tucked tightly in my arms. That night my sleep became agitated and restless. I unwittingly was drawn into a very lucid dreamlike state. In this dream I would see myself sitting on a haystack outside a farmer's red barn. There were horses grazing in a nearby field. One of the black and bay American quarter horses looked up at me through dark, disquieted eyes that suggested the horse was bothered about something. I felt as if the horse was telling me to be very careful. I remember thinking to myself in the dream that it was strange for a horse to be communicating to me like this. The horse began to fix its eyes on something that was standing behind me. He let out a warning neigh. He began to shake his head up and down, while his long dark tail thrashed backwards and forwards, as if he was squatting a multitude of flies. I hurriedly turned around to follow the horse's gaze. In my dream I could see the shock on my own face, the colour draining away from my skin. I was observing the ugliest, most hideous black-winged creature that I have ever beheld. It is hard to describe the creature to you in words. It looked like a cross between a demon, a vulture, and a man. His red eyes glowered at me, and then he hissed in my face, "I'm coming to get you." Before I knew it, the creature plucked a large black feather out of its wings and placed one of the feathers in my hand. He let out a loud, satisfied cackle, and then flew into the depths of a very black sky. I woke up with quite the start, because Pringles was making a weird kind of commotion. Her meow had become more like a wail. She jumped away from me, off the bed, letting out a growl and a hiss. She cowered in the corner for a second, and then finally dashed under the bed to hide. I was so exhausted from all my crying, but Pringles' absurd idiosyncratic behaviour got my attention, so I wiped away some of the cobwebs of sleep from my eyes. The curtains in my bedroom had not been drawn that night, so the moonlight spilled magnanimously into the room. All the furniture was illuminated in the pearly light. I could hear Pringles still hissing from under the bed. Something had grievously upset her. She was behaving much like she had done when I had felt the menacious presence in my parents' kitchen. In that second I recalled my dream with a vivid clarity, as I realized the winged creature that had visited many of my family members shortly before they had died had all but visited me. Did that mean I was also going to die? I realized I was clutching something tightly in my hand. I glanced down at my hand, horrified to discover that I was holding a large black feather, like the feather that had been given to me in my dream by the hideously ugly winged creature. It was like one of the black feathers that I had discovered on my parents' bed. when I found their deceased bodies. How was this even possible? Did this mean my dream was real? In that horrifying, surreal moment, I had a profound sense that I was not alone. Something was there. Chills of dread shot down my spine. My whole body nervously prickled with an electric static. I knew there was something standing in the dark corner of my room, but I couldn't see it clearly. Whatever it was watching me, observing me, keeping its eyes pinned on me. The energy it exuded was inauspiciously malevolent. I knew it was a dark shadow of some kind, but I couldn't make it out clearly. I was paralyzed with an all-consuming fear, while Pringle remained under the bed and continued to hiss. I was certain the winged creature that had come to finish me off, like it had done my parents in that freak accident with the carbon monoxide poisoning, was here right now with me. What was I going to do? I didn't want to fall victim to some kind of freak accident that this evil entity would organize for me. The fear I felt was all-consuming. My body began to shake like a leaf. In my head, I kept hearing a very disturbing, raspy, gravelly voice, talking to me and saying, "Go on, do it. Swallow all the pills. You've got nothing left to live for. Even the doctor rejected you. Nobody wants you. Nobody loves you. Go on, do it." In my head, I suddenly was taken to my bathroom cabinet, filled with bottles and bottles of pills. The voice urged me on, encouraging me to take them all. "Swallow the pills. Take them. You'll never have to wake up." I knew it was the winged creature, filling my mind with these preposterous ideas. I knew I needed immediate help, as the desire to walk over to the bathroom cabinet, to take out the bottles of pills, and to swallow them all, was all-consuming. It was like something else had taken full control of my faculties, of my body and mind, and I couldn't fight against it. I knew if I didn't get help at once, I would almost certainly swallow those pills, and I couldn't afford to allow that to happen. I did have Dr. Bernstone's cell phone number somewhere, and I was only ever allowed to call him if I was in a rock-bottom place, and there was no time like the present. I needed Dr. Bernstone's help at once. There was no one else I could possibly call who would fully understand what I was going through. Dr. Bernstone was the only person who fully knew about the wicked and very evil Haitian curse that had been afflicted on my family. He was the only person I could trust in this dangerous situation. Who else could I turn to for help? So before I could change my mind, I quickly dialed Dr. Bernstone's number. "Dr. Bernstone, I've been a psychologist for over 10 years now. It might as well have been a lifetime. It feels like that at times. To all intents and purposes, when you're helping people work through their trauma, it's hard not to allow their harrowing issues to impact your own life. I mean, if you swim around in the murky water for long enough, it's hard not to become contaminated by it. As a consequence, I always conduct my counselling sessions as professionally as possible. I try to keep an emotional distance from my patients. If I didn't do this, I probably would lead a very dysfunctional life indeed. Of course, it goes without saying that I have counselled many people over the years from many walks of life, but no one, I hasten to say, has been more interesting than my client Lisa. Now here was a very brave, courageous young lady, who had quite the story to tell, that I will admit had every hair on the back of my body standing up on edge. I knew the story she told me was unequivocally true. You couldn't listen to Lisa's account and doubt what she was telling you, for she spoke with real passion from her heart. I absolutely believe that the bizarre, enigmatic manner in which all her family members died could not have been a mere coincidence. I knew there was so much more to this story than would meet the eye. Ostensibly, the insidious deaths of members of Lisa's family had all been clandestinely made to look like tragic, unforeseen accidents. That had been the idea, I suspect. But let's not kid. The evil one and his minions can be cunningly manipulative and very deceitful at the very best of times. I know this because I grew up the son of a pastor. I learnt much about the occult, about people dealing with demonic attacks and oppression. So this was not a new phenomenon to me by any manner of means. Had I not been brought up in a religious household, maybe I would have been more of a cynic about such matters. But my father opened my eyes to a darker side of the world that few people talk about. On one occasion my father went to bless a house of one of his parishioners, a woman called Deborah. This woman got divorced from her husband and wanted to keep custody of her children, as many women in her position would do. It seemed like she was going through an ongoing tumultuous battle with her husband, who had informed her that he fully intended to take everything from her, which I expected included her life, if he could get away with it, of course. And what better way to do this than recruit the services of someone who deals with voodoo and knows how to access the demonic realm. The woman described her husband as a violent, abusive man, who for many years she had never had the courage to leave, for fear of what he might actually do to her. One day she suddenly decided she couldn't take living with her husband a moment longer. It had all got too much for her. She had finally reached the place of no return. She courageously filed for divorce and moved in with her mother. Deborah's husband had a good friend heavily involved in voodoo. Her husband had threatened that should she ever leave him, he would get this friend of his to put a hex on her that would destroy her life. She knew her worst fears had been confirmed when strange, very bizarre things began to happen in her mother's household that could not be put down to natural phenomenon. She would hear growls, footsteps thumping up and down the staircase at night, doors opening and closing and slamming on their own accord. And worst of all, she described feelings of being continuously watched all the time, and something standing there at the foot of her bed, staring at her. There were times she and her mother would see dark shadows in the corner of rooms that would finally disappear when you turned around to look at them. As luck would have it, Deborah's mother had organised for the chimney to be swept, and the chimney sweep arrived on the premises and began to sweep the chimney. When he cleaned it out, he discovered a voodoo doll had been placed in a little hollow in the brickwork, inside the chimney. The voodoo doll had a pin placed strategically right through the heart area. Deborah was certain that this was the work of her husband, and that the doll represented her. It was clear her husband wanted her dead, so he could have full custody of their children. My father was immediately called over to Deborah's mother's house. He was asked to pray a blessing over the place, but he was flung violently across the floor by a powerful demonic entity that didn't want him there. He hit his head so badly he acquired several stitches in his scalp, and Deborah's mother's floor looked like a crime scene because my father's blood was splattered everywhere. My father immediately consulted the Catholic Church and found a Catholic priest that was willing to handle the exorcism of both Deborah and the house that she was residing in with her mother. My father was present at that exorcism. He observed the demon leaving the house in a spiral of black smoke. The Catholic priest, who had fasted for many days, stood his ground, meeting with much resistance from the evil he encountered. I was later to learn that Deborah's husband was found days later, lying dead with a knife wound through his heart. It was almost as if the demon that had been summoned up had vengefully turned on the one who'd called upon his services. It was almost as if some kind of divine karma had been orchestrated. When Lisa came to my offices to tell me her incredulous story, I have to admit I was drawn right in, like a fish is to the fly at the end of a fisherman's line. It is difficult to be detached when you hear a story like Lisa's. I was resolutely determined to do my utmost to help this young lady recover from the debilitating effects of so much trauma that had paralyzed her life. She did have a very real fear that the winged creature that many of her family members had seen in their dreams shortly before their deaths might finally appear to her and then take her out in such a way that her death would look accidental and therefore never be investigated. I did my level best to reassure Lisa that this would be unlikely to happen to her. I didn't want her mind to be preoccupied with such dreadful thoughts, for I knew she'd never be able to heal from her trauma if she was thinking in that mindset. I gave her my cell phone number so she could call me if she felt this demonic entity had come back into her life. One day, after a year of counselling, Lisa arrived at my offices promptly, looking ever so slightly apprehensive. I knew by the way she was clutching the orange throw cushion so tightly to her chest that something was preying heavily on her mind. When Lisa finally admitted that she had fallen in love with me, it took me off my guard. I cannot tell you how very common it is for patients to develop an attachment to their therapist. It stands to reason, of course. They often believe they're in love with their therapist, when they fail to realize that the reason that they feel like this is because of the listening ear and the deep connection they may feel with their therapist. Let's just say the therapist is showing compassion and care during these sessions, making the patient believe there is something romantic between them, when there really is not. If I had an unhealthy attraction to a patient, as an unmarried psychologist, if that were to happen, I would immediately pass over such a patient to another therapist. I would never want to, under any circumstances, compromise my integrity, or cross over any blurred lines, so to speak. Lisa was a lovely person. It was impossible not to like her very much. I was a professional psychologist, and I wanted the best for her. I decided, under the very sensitive circumstances, I needed to refer Lisa to someone else. It was a pity that I couldn't work with her through her trauma. I would have liked to continue doing so, but I couldn't compromise my integrity. So sometimes you do what needs to be done for the sake of your patient. Things did not end well when Lisa stormed out of my office, looking as lost and disheveled as an abandoned kitten that nobody wants to adopt. It grieved my heart greatly that things had come to this end, but what could I do about it? I really was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Imagine my surprise when I was woken in the middle of the night to find my cell phone erupting in a tuneful chorus. I had been fast asleep at the time, but the obtrusive, unrelenting noise woke me up, shaking me out of my sleep. I groaned in frustration, reaching over to answer my cell phone. Who on earth would be calling me at this late time of night? I was stunned to see on the caller ID that it was my patient Lisa on the end of the line. I was tempted not to answer the call. Was she calling to tell me how in love she was with me, when she knew the only time she was allowed to phone me was in an emergency situation? I really did not need all this drama. I had made the boundaries between us poignantly clear. I very nearly did not answer that call, but a little voice inside my head told me not to ignore it. I knew if I went back to sleep, I would become restless, concerning myself that Lisa might have been calling me about a problem that she was having, and how would I be able to live with myself if I ignored her? "Lisa," I said, "do you realize what time it is? Why are you calling me in the middle of the night? This better be good." I could hear a muted whisper on the other end of the phone. "Dr. Bernstone! Dr. Bernstone, is that you? Is that you?" "It's me. What's wrong?" "Oh, Dr. Bernstone, I don't know why this is happening to me after all this time, but the winged creature, he appeared to me in my dream." "Why don't you tell me what happened in your dream, Lisa?" "Well, Dr. Bernstone, I saw myself sitting on a haystack outside this red barn. There was this horse in a field. He was close to the barn. He was looking at me, warning me about something. He looked troubled and was staring at something behind me. I turned around to follow the horse's gaze, and that's when I saw him, Dr. Bernstone, the winged creature. He plucked a feather out of his wing. He put it in my hand. He was smirking at me, Dr. Bernstone. I knew I'd been dreaming, but my cat Pringles woke me up with a start. She was hissing at something in the room. She dived under our bed to take cover, She was so affrighted, Dr. Bernstone. When I woke up, I had a black feather in my hands. Where did it come from, Dr. Bernstone? Where did it come from?"
At this startling revelation, my heart became as cold as ice. My pulse began to race, and I could taste nausea developing at the back of my throat. This I did not need to hear. This was not good news. "You woke up after your dream, is that what you're saying, Lisa? And you found a black feather in your hand. Is that right?"
"That's right, Dr. Bernstone. Similar to the feathers I found on my parents' bed after they died. You should see Pringles, Dr. Bernstone. She's absolutely terrified. She's cowering under the bed right now, even as I speak. The winged creature, Dr. Bernstone. I can't physically see him, but I sense him. He's in the room with me. I can feel his presence. But the worst thing of all, Dr. Bernstone, is he's taken over my head. He's taken over my body. I know it sounds strange, but he keeps telling me to swallow a whole bunch of pills. He's got an enormous hold over my mind, Dr. Bernstone. He's telling me to go into the bathroom, to go to the cabinet, and to take the pills out. I did that. I've got a bottle of pills in my hand, Dr. Bernstone. I'm so scared I'm going to swallow them all. I don't want to kill myself, Dr. Bernstone. I really don't. But it's like my body isn't my own anymore. This winged creature, Dr. Bernstone, it's controlling me. It's persuading me to take these pills. And I'm so tempted to do it. I think I'm going to do it. How can I stop doing it, Dr. Bernstone? I need your help. I don't want to kill myself. I'm so frightened. I'm so scared.
Calm down, Lisa. Everything's going to be absolutely fine. Just give me your address, will you? I'm coming to pick you up right now. Leave your front door open so I can get in.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Bernstone. I'm so sorry to wake you up in the middle of the night like this, but there's no one I could call but you. Only you understand what I'm fighting against.
Just keep calm, Lisa. Hold it together. And don't let this thing persuade you to take those pills. Keep saying the Lord's Prayer out loud. It'll help you. I'll be there as quickly as I can, I promise. I knew I lived in the countryside, but with the roads all clear, it took me a good 25 minutes to reach Lisa's apartment. I had to climb several flights of stairs to get to her flat, but thank God Lisa had left the front door wide open. When I entered her apartment, all I can say is, there are no words. Lisa was cowering in the corner of her bedroom, staring in terror at the far corner of the room, where I could sense a demonic entity. Like her, I couldn't see anything, but boy, did I feel it. Lisa had a bottle of pills in her hands and was saying the Lord's Prayer over and over again as quickly as she could.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen.
I grabbed the pills from her and hurriedly ran into the bathroom to flush them all down the toilet. After I'd thrown the pills down the toilet, I felt a degree of relief. But then I found myself being lifted into the air and flung across Lisa's bedroom, where I hit the wall and did some damage to my head because my head began to throb. Whatever had hurled me across the room had done so with a violent force, so much so that several pictures on the walls collapsed and crashed onto the ground. I couldn't physically see what had made me feel so powerless, but I didn't waste any time. Lisa screamed, but I grabbed her hand, and together we ran down several flights of steps. Finally, we reached the car park. I climbed into my SUV, closing the doors behind us, accelerating away from the complex as fast as I possibly could.
We left Pringles behind, Dr. Bernstone. We have to go and get her. She's so terrified.
I'm sorry, Lisa, we can't do that. I'm sure Pringles will be fine. The demon is after you, not Pringles. You're not safe going back to your apartment. I'm taking you to my home in the countryside. You'll be safe there. I will contact my father. He'll help us deal with this problem."
"Dr. Bernstone, I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. I was so close to taking those pills. That thing took complete control of my mind and my body."
"It was not me who saved your life, Lisa. You did that yourself, by reciting the Lord's Prayer, and that prayer is very powerful indeed." For the rest of the car journey back to my country home, me and Lisa said nothing. It was late, and the shock of what we both experienced hit us both hard like a cold slap on the face. If I'd ever had any doubt in the story that Lisa had told me when she first came to my offices about the curse her family had been afflicted with by a Haitian woman called Anna, those doubts were ironed away in a second. I was in no doubt that Lisa was in very grave danger by a malignantly powerful force, the likes of such that only the church could deal with. This was not a problem that the average Joe such as myself could fix. This was not a fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities of evil in high places. I decided when we reached my home, I would put Lisa up for the night in the spare bedroom. I would call my father to come around to the house at once, because he would know what to do to keep her safe from this demonic entity. At one point during my journey home, we began to drive down a rugged, sequestered country road that I knew well, but it was very dark, surrounded by trees, and of course there were no street lights in such a remote part of the countryside.
"Where are we?"
Lisa asked, looking bemused. I guess she hadn't expected I would live in the countryside like this, and assumed I lived in some fancy apartment.
"Do you live in the sticks? I had no idea."
"I'd hardly call it the sticks. I live relatively close to town, do I not? But I enjoy being in the country. Don't worry, we are close to my farmhouse now. Once we're inside, I'll call my father, and he'll be around in a shot. He only lives 15 minutes away from me."
"What the hell is that?"
asked Lisa, pointing towards the road.
"It's standing in the road, looking at us. What is it, Dr. Bernstone?"
I peered through the window rather gingerly, and that was when I saw him. Nothing prepared me for what I was seeing. I guess this thing wanted to show himself to us, so he manifested before us so clearly that we were in no doubt of what we were seeing. It was clearly a demon. My whole body began to shake involuntarily, like a tree on a very, very windy day. What I was seeing was insidiously evil, very repugnant. It stood before us in the middle of the road, at about 8 foot tall, humanoid-looking, and strappingly built, with black wings and feathers all over the body, horns on the head, and glowing red eyes that were maliciously evil. I'd never seen anything more hideously vile, repugnant, or grotesque in all my life. This hideous, vile beast looked like he'd been summoned up from hell itself, and the vindictive hatred in its eyes was like nothing I'd ever witnessed before. I was now certain that this was not going to end well. I felt sure that Lisa and I were finally close to meeting our Maker. This thing wanted us dead, and he wanted us dead now. I could feel this in every fibre of my being. I also got a sense that this winged creature was mocking us.
"Dr. Bernstone! Oh my goodness! It's the winged creature!"
cried Lisa.
"The one I saw in my dream! The one I told you about! It's going to kill us! I know it's going to kill us!"
She let out a strangled, very frightened cry. She began to clutch me tightly, so much so that I winced out in pain as her fingernails dug into my flesh.
"It's going to kill us, isn't it, Dr. Bernstone? It's going to kill us!"
Lisa cried out.
"I can feel it! What are we going to do? What are we going to do, Dr. Bernstone?"
I couldn't answer, Lisa. My words were stuck in the back of my throat. Nothing would come out. I was about to turn the car around, as what else could I do? And as I considered doing this, the car began to rattle and shake on its own accord. Then it began to move forwards and backwards on its own, as if it was a toy car that a boy was playing with on the carpet at home. I realized that this insidious creature was doing this with the power of his mind and watching us as if we were two characters in a movie. Only he would determine the outcome of this story. And by the menacing, self-satisfied, smug look on his face, this would be a story with a very grim ending indeed. I remember thinking, if you're going to kill us, do it now. All of a sudden there was a shrill, ear-piercing scream, like nothing I've ever heard before or since. And thundering through the woods were 4 powerful creatures covered in long, flowing hair. My first thought was this winged creature had called for reinforcements, more demons from hell to toy with us and to stoke up our terror, like the flames in a fire. I was amazed to see the creatures approaching the demon were 4 strapping Bigfoot. They ran into the road as if they themselves were flying. I've never before or since beheld anything move that fast before, with so much dignified grace. The agility of those Bigfoots left me breathless. To my amazement, the 4 Bigfoots circled this evil entity with a fearless confidence. They were screaming at this thing, and this monster that had tormented us only moments before was cowering pathetically in their presence. I realized I was watching a war before my very eyes between good and evil. The Bigfoots were on the side of the light. That was clear to see. They knew how to deal with this evil entity, as if they had a profound understanding of the supernatural realm, that I clearly do not. One of the Bigfoots briefly glanced up at me in the front seat of my car, and in my head I heard him say, "I've got this. We're sending him back from whence he came. This evil was conjured up. It has no place being here." What happened next was so supernatural. The ground just opened up in the middle of the road, and when it did I could hear the screams of the tormented rising through that hole, and the ground in the hollow was so red it looked like everything was on fire. Smoke rose up from the ground, and I heard the cries of the damned. The cowering demonic entity was flung into hell like a portal, without much resistance, as if resigned to its impending fate. It appeared to be no match for these powerful Bigfoots. To this day I believe these Bigfoots were angels sent by God himself. To my amazement, the ground swallowed up the demon and then closed up on its own accord. The one male Bigfoot, who was easily over 10 foot tall, powerfully built, walked over to the passenger side window and tapped on it to get Lisa's attention. He beckoned for Lisa to get out of the car. I knew he wanted to help us.
"What should I do?"
Lisa asked me with wide eyes.
"The Bigfoot wants me to get out of the car."
"Do as he says," I said confidently. "He's on the side of the light. He wants to help you." Lisa reluctantly climbed out of the car. She stood there awkwardly in the middle of the road. The Bigfoot's eyes were so kind. I knew that any fear Lisa might have entertained would have promptly left her. All the Bigfoots were giving her an encouraging look. Lisa told me afterwards that the Bigfoot that was speaking to her told her in her head that he wasn't going to hurt her, but he needed to remove the curse that had been cast over her in case the demon was conjured up again, because if he was, he would come after her. He put his hand on Lisa, and all of a sudden out of her head a snake materialized. It was being pulled out of Lisa by the Bigfoot. It looked as real as any physical snake you would see. It was writhing, hissing and moving, and with one hand the Bigfoot tore the snake to shreds, threw it onto the ground, and it just vanished from sight, dissipating like black smoke from a chimney, and was gone. The Bigfoot surrounded Lisa. They appeared to be talking to her intently. She was nodding. Finally she sashayed back to the car, in a very upbeat mood, a different person to the one that I'd met cowering in her bedroom only moments before. Once Lisa climbed back into my car, the Bigfoots nodded at the both of us. Then they glided away, and I watched them disappear into the trees. I marvelled at what they had done, and how they had miraculously come to our rescue at the quintessential perfect timing, which made me all the more convinced that they were angelic. "What the hell?" I said to Lisa. "Did that just happen? Or am I deluding myself? Am I dreaming or something?" "Ouch!" I said, when Lisa reached out to pinch my arm. "What is that for?" I asked.
"It's to tell you that you're not dreaming,"
that all this is very real, and it did happen.
I can't believe it. I can't believe we saw 4 Bigfoots surrounding that demon.
It was incredible, wasn't it? Said Lisa.
I nodded, for I would have never considered Bigfoots to be angelic, but they were exactly that.
They told me I didn't have to worry any more about the curse, that it's been broken for good.
It was true. The curse had indeed been broken. But better than that, Lisa felt the heaviness lift off her life all at once. She was very happy to return to her apartment, to find Pringles safe and well, and in jolly good spirits. She continued her sessions with me, finally admitting that her confessions of love towards me were because I'd made her feel lighter and better about herself. To this very day we remain very good friends, but Lisa has made a brand new life for herself. She is now happily married with 2 lovely children, and while she misses her family very much, she has thankfully been able to move on with her life. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, that was the most fabulous story. What a story. Incredible. Loved every minute of it, and I hope you did too. Until next time, goodbye and good night.